Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Pretty Petty Politics. We are beginning our candidate conversation series, and tonight I'm joined by none other than Zoe Cadore, who is a candidate for Congressional District 18. So, here's the way I usually have people introduce themselves. Tell me about your first time voting.
Ooh, okay. Well, my very first voting experience was actually for President Barack Obama, and I was a student at Spelman College. I was a sophomore,
Mhm.
and I also had a chance to work on his campaign. So I was his on-campus coordinator. So my job was to like get everyone excited and making sure we were actually going out to the polls. But specifically, we wanted to make sure we were voting in Georgia. And so
Mhm.
it's the one time that I did not vote in Texas, and you know it's the Atlanta University Center, which is full of HBCUs. So
Mhm.
we were very excited to vote for him, but it was even more special to be a part of that. And yeah, I cast my vote on election day. And obviously that night we watched him win and become the first African American president. And it was just one of the best experiences of my life. But I felt so proud because I grew up going to the ballot box with my mom. So I always look forward to being able to vote. And I had planned to come home, but then I was in college and I wanted to be a part of the HBCU voting for Barack Obama experience. And so I
Yeah.
decided to vote at home, or sorry, decided to vote at Spelman. But it was, I mean, it was great. And I just felt very proud and like I had fulfilled the dreams of my ancestors by casting my vote on that day.
Oh, wow. That's excellent. And with you being in Georgia, I mean, you were a student there, so it makes sense. That was your home at the time.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't understand why college students who are away from home will vote where they are enrolled. And
Right.
that's because that's your community.
Yeah.
So, as a voter in that climate, not just as an organizer, but as a voter in that climate, how did you feel connected to other voters? Like, what was that experience like for you?
Yes, I mean, we're all going through the emotions of the potential of Barack Obama becoming the first president. And then, especially at a school like Spelman, with Spelman and Morehouse, and the history and the legacy of voting rights that comes out of those colleges, we just felt like a very real responsibility to make sure that we were doing our part in Georgia. And so, while we may not have won the state, we made sure we had a very strong showing in Atlanta.
Mhm.
And it was a wonderful way to pay homage to the many people, such as Congressman John Lewis, who fought for our right to vote, and who came before us and made it possible for President Obama to become the president.
Okay. So tell us about um, you when you were in college. What was your major and what really galvanized you to get to the point that you are today?
Yes, so I was a drama and dance major in college,
Okay.
and I knew I was going to go to law school because I had decided I wasn't going to pursue dance professionally, even though I did for a little bit. But it was a wonderful experience because I am a huge lover of the arts and I love dance. And so I had a chance to have that creative outlet while also being a political science minor.
Mhm.
But I knew I was probably going into politics when I was actually in high school because I was a teen court attorney.
Oh, tell us more.
Yeah, so in Texas, in some of the smaller counties where they don't have enough attorneys, they will allow teenagers who participate in speech and debate to participate in this teen court program.
Mhm.
And so we are able to argue on behalf of juveniles that have been found guilty of a misdemeanor.
Mhm.
And so small crimes, but still a crime. And we're not arguing whether or not they're innocent or guilty, but we're just arguing the type of punishment.
Mhm.
So it was my first experience with advocacy because I took my responsibility as a defender very seriously because I had all the reasons why my client needed to get the minimum level of punishment for the level of the crime that they had committed. And so that was kind of my first taste of what advocacy looked like. And then when I was at Spelman College, I had a chance to be a Georgia Legislative Black Caucus Foundation Fellow. And so I spent 2 years working at the Georgia Legislative House of Representatives. And I worked when Stacey Abrams was a member of the legislature. Representative Calvin Spivey, who's very well known across the country. He was one of the members I had a chance to work for. And then I also worked for a woman named Representative Nikki Randall, whose father had also served in the legislature. And she was a wonderful mentor and has remained a mentor to this day.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful. I love to hear stories about like our beginnings,
Mhm.
right? Where we really get that footing. So fast forward, you attend U of H Law Center, you graduate, you become barred. what happens next?
Yes. So I came out when we were kind of coming out of the recession. And so, but jobs were still really hard to find. And so I was trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to do. I had spent some time in Washington prior to that, and I had worked for Congresswoman Jackson Lee. So I really wanted to go back to DC. And I had the fortune of becoming a Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Energy Fellow. So I went back to Washington about a year and a half after I graduated and took the bar. And I went into this 2-year fellowship. I had a chance to work first with Congressman Mark Vesey, and then I went to the American Petroleum Institute first as a fellow, and then I was hired on to their full staff. And that kind of started my career in the federal energy policy space.
Okay, so tell us about, so were you a registered lobbyist?
No, so at this time I was not. I did policy work. So I helped create policy as it related to natural gas and electricity. I did a lot of workforce development work as it related to diversifying the oil and gas industry. I had a chance to work on environmental justice issues and what that policy looked like. And so I assisted our lobbyists with creating the policy that they ultimately took to Capitol Hill to argue for. But I also had a chance to work really closely with a lot of third parties, such as the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the tribes, and a lot of different groups, NAACP, Urban League. We had a lot of partnerships. And so I, being one of the very few people of color at the Institute at the time, I was kind of the liaison. So a lot of people may have thought I was a lobbyist because I was around the members of Congress so much, but actually was not when I was at API. But from that position, I was asked to, I was hired to Calpine, based here in Houston, to be their head lobbyist for their federal team. And that is when I began my lobbying career during the pandemic in 2020.
Oh, wow. So what has that experience so you've done various facets of work in DC. You've seen various things, you work with different leaders. How has that prepared you, that work experience, how has that prepared you for this next opportunity, should you be elected as because we are in CD 18, right? Yeah. So as our next member of Congress representing us in the House of Representatives.
Yes. I mean, Washington is a very complex world. You have to study it the way you would study any subject. And so it's one of those places, until you've been there, you just can't understand it. And I think a lot of times here on the local side, we look at what we do in the community and we look at that as a qualification to serve in DC. But really, the other part of it is just as important, because ultimately we're being elected to go to Washington, DC, to represent your community. So you want to have close ties and understanding, but really you need to know how to then take those concerns and know how to navigate Washington, DC, understanding what the process of Capitol Hill actually is, because it is very different from the state, from the city, or even from the county. Knowing who the players are. It is not just you coming and having these wonderful ideas and then just saying, okay, now it's law. You have to work with 434 other people. You have to work with outside groups such as lobbyists. And, you know, being a lobbyist, a federal lobbyist, first of all, there are very few African-American federal lobbyists, registered lobbyists. We make up less than 5% of the profession. A lot of times we get a bad rap, but I tell people the Black lobbyists and minority lobbyists are sometimes the only reason why legislation is passed with our communities in mind. Because when a Republican member of Congress is working on a bill, while the Democrats may not have any power, we still have the power to go to those offices and have influence over how that bill is crafted. And that is something that we have that luxury of doing because of our positions. And so I always say you should never discourage minorities from being lobbyists, because a lot of times we are the first line of defense, and we are the only people in the room keeping our communities in mind, not just for our specific companies, but sometimes for the entire industry. Because we have industries where you'll have 100 lobbyists and maybe only 5 of them are people of color. And so it's really important that we are showing up in all spaces and having a seat at the table. But the biggest thing is you see the true collaboration, which we've lost a lot of that because of a lot of what's happening in DC by the direction of President Trump, who is a very controversial figure. But really, federal government works best when it is collaborative, when Democrats and Republicans, when people from different parts of the country, with people with different interests are all coming together and expressing those interests, the pros and cons, and then thinking about where is the common ground. And that is where I've had a chance to see some of our most fearless leaders do their best work.
Okay. So for the people who aren't familiar with your campaign, You're very warm. I love that. You have great energy. But tell us about your platform. What are your key issues and parts of your platform that you would like to institute should you arrive in DC as our next member of Congress?
Yes, it's two things. One is just common sense policies. I think we have gotten away from things that just simply make sense. We're arguing and bringing nuances and complexities into issues that really are not that complicated. If there's a storm, the lights should turn on, and we need policies that help ensure that the lights turn on. If we have a community that is lacking public school funding on the state level, well, then let's figure out how to alleviate that on the federal level. It's just common sense, right? If a woman wants to have an abortion or not, let her do that. Common sense. And so I want to bring common sense back to Washington, because unfortunately we are so far to the left or so far to the right on a lot of issues that people are not thinking rationally anymore. They're just thinking with their emotions.
So polarized.
It's so polarizing. And you guys, the rest of the world is looking at you all like, can we just do the basic things? Like, let's fix that first. Like, eggs are still $10. How about let's work on that first before we try to go, stop war overseas, which are important issues, but you can't forget the very simple issues here on the ground as well. So common sense policies. The other thing is I want to make sure that we are just generally making life better for everyday people. I think we do a lot that focuses on, the underserved, the poor, very, very important. We do a lot of things that help billionaires. But what about the people in the middle? What about the everyday people who do what we tell you you're supposed to do? Go to school, get an education, work a job, work hard, pay your taxes. But somehow they're not able to afford a home. They can't put their kids through school or college. They're not able to take a vacation. They're not living life. They're just kind of moving through life. And I want to make sure that in Houston, we are able to live and we're able to thrive. This is the 4th largest city in America. I think it's the best city in America. I was Miss Houston years ago, so I can attest to that. And there's no reason why every family in this city should not be able to live a thriving life. And so that is what I want to help us do.
Okay. So you brought up education. We know as a member of Congress, you would have some influence perhaps in our state, right? In our state, we have new laws on the books concerning education, particularly where we have this voucher program. Mm-hmm. What would you like to see happen on a federal level to help us navigate these states who are turning to these voucher programs and thus arguably causing deficiencies in public schools?
Yes. First thing I'll say, and I know this is sometimes a controversial topic especially amongst Democrats, but I think the vouchers are a very complex conversation to have. One thing I like to do is ask people of different backgrounds what are their thoughts on our state policies, and I get a mixed read. Some families will say the voucher works for them because they do want to put their children in a certain type of school that might be able to attend to their needs, particularly if that child has special needs and they want to put them in a school that can actually be attentive to that. And then some people hate the vouchers. I think it's not a either or. I think it's a yes and. I think you can have vouchers, but we also need to make sure that we are uplifting our public school education system. And so, unfortunately, the state of Texas right now is not interested in investing in our public schools, at least not the ones that service Black and brown children. And so there are ways on the federal level that you can supplement that. I would look at where we're lacking certain programs as it relates to mental health services, the arts. I think that's a wonderful thing that children need to have in their schools. And I was a after-school dance teacher for many years here in Houston. Where can we enhance sports if that's something that they need? I think every school has something where they're lacking, and we can find ways to strategically get federal funding to help supplement that. And so it doesn't fully fix the problem, but it does create a short-term solution to where our children are able to still have some type of extracurricular experience, or having more teachers that are able to teach certain subjects, or making sure that we're able to provide even something as simple as a bonus to our teachers who are very underpaid. But until we're able to change their pay, what can we do in the near term? So it's all about finding strategic ways to address the issues. And that is something that I learned working in Washington, D.C., because sometimes it's not going to be a very straightforward law that changes things. Maybe it's like a small amendment that allows for a little additional funding that's discretionary. And then you can give that to the county or the city. They can give it to the schools on a grant base. But then that discretionary spending allows you to spend it in ways that are creative.
Okay, I love that. So, next, I want to ask you, there is a major issue in Houston when it comes to environmental justice,
Mhm.
particularly in the 18th Congressional District. I know the Congresswoman, Sheila Jackson Lee, as well as the Congressman, Sylvester Turner. Those were things that they wanted to see be solved
Yeah.
or be addressed. How will you address the environmental justice issues that we have here in Houston, particularly in the 18th Congressional District?
Yes. So as I mentioned, I've worked a lot on EJ issues, and one of the biggest issues with EJ is that we try to fix it after the problem has already happened.
Mm-hmm.
And you really want to be preventative. So you have to be able to work with industry from the beginning of any type of project where there might be an environmental harm on a specific community. That means that you have to be in common communication with industry. We cannot adopt this approach of we just ignore industry and we allow industry to ignore us. It has to be a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked on a lot of development projects across the country. And I've been fortunate to work for companies that were very intentional about keeping the community in the loop. And so you have to do that, but also your leaders have to be keeping these industries at the table to make sure they understand what's happening. And so any type of project that takes place in our community, we should know what it is. We should know what the benefits are. We should know what the defects are. We should be having roundtable discussions with our community leaders. And I tell companies, community leader does not just mean elected officials. Sometimes it's the teacher, it's the pastor, it's the little grandmother that sits on the stoop that understands what this community needs and what it's gone through. Because you as a company, if you're not doing your due diligence, you may not understand that this neighborhood is prone to flooding, and by you adding in this cement plant, you're now making them flood even more. So these are conversations you have to have with the community. And what I would do is make sure that we are being very transparent about any project before it starts. For you to even get the federal funding, we need to understand what it is that you are doing. Under President Biden's administration and one of the grants that I worked on, they had a community benefits agreement, and that made sure that the companies, before they even applied for the grant, had laid out everything they were going to do to support their community. So understanding what it is that we're bringing to the community in terms of a project, what support we're providing to the community as it relates to jobs or any type of apprenticeship, or even if it's just giving out sponsorships as a result of the resources that you get from that project. And that had to be brought to the table before we even decided if you were going to receive the grant for that project. And so President Trump has taken that away. But that does not mean that we cannot do that as a district,
bring it back,
or that we can do it as a city, or I can simply do it as a member of Congress. One thing that projects and companies do when they want to do a project, they have to get buy-in from their elected officials. I'm not going to sign a letter supporting a project if we haven't had a conversation with the community, and if I don't have a clear understanding about whether or not this is actually going to be harmful to the people that I represent or the city at large. And so that is one way that I would be taking that accountability. But this is where having that industry experience really plays a role, because I understand how a project works from start to finish. So I can see from, just a piece of paperwork where the project is in the process and making sure that we're holding them accountable.
Okay. A little bit more about environmental justice. With us having so many issues, we have cancer clusters here in the district. We always have something going on with the various rail corporations. What specific experience besides policy, but what have you done for local advocacy, I guess is what I want to ask, local advocacy concerning environmental justice? Could you talk about some of those projects and the successes from them?
Yes. So I have done stuff, I would say, I guess, indirectly to for the local community. And that is specifically working with the companies that I've represented. So I was a part of the creation of the Environmental Partnership. It was an initiative that came out of the American Petroleum Institute. And this was before the Biden administration, which was very aggressive on environmental policies. And so it was an agreement with numerous oil and gas companies to make sure that we were looking at areas where there had been environmental concerns in the past, or potentially were upcoming environmental concerns, and we were figuring out ways to mitigate them. And they were going out and talking to stakeholders. We were speaking with other elected officials and regulators about what these concerns were and how we were going to work as an industry to address them. So that is something that I played a role in. I've also been very active with the American Association of Blacks in Energy to ensure that we are speaking about environmental justice issues and that our local leaders are aware of the work that's being done on the industry side, but also making sure that they understand there needs to be a two-way street of communication as it relates to this. So because I have spent most of my work in DC, that is what I've been able to do to address things on a national level, but these are national level solutions that are ultimately trickled down to the local level.
To the local.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So I know you've probably been knocking on doors
Yes.
around the city. What are you hearing from the constituents, from the residents of the 18th, voters and non-voters?
Yeah.
What concerns are you hearing? And of those concerns, which ones are you making priority?
Yes. I mean, one, I think a lot of constituents are still grieving the loss of Congressman Turner and Congresswoman Jackson Lee. And so they want to know that we are going to put someone in office that is going to continue on for a while, because I think it's just very hard for our community to lose back to back the way we have with two members of Congress. And also with the redistricting, people are very concerned about that. They, what are we going to do to fight back? How are we going to fix this? Unfortunately, there's not much we can do outside of lawsuits right now. But the reality is these maps are going to stick, and we are going to be faced with different districts as it relates to the upcoming primary. So we have to be preparing our communities, making sure that we are preparing the next generation of leaders. And this doesn't mean that we are ousting current leaders. It's just making sure that we do have that succession planning, because these districts are now going to change, and leadership in these districts will now look different. The other thing is, like I said, just these everyday issues. We're in the middle of hurricane season. People want to know how we're addressing potential flooding. If there is a weather event, what is going to happen. We're coming up on the anniversary of Ike, and so folks still have PTSD from that. So I think weather concerns are always a big concern of folks, and because I worked in energy, people tend to ask me questions about our grid, and so that is something I do prioritize, making sure that we are continuing to enhance our grid, and that is something that on the federal government side, while there's not a lot of jurisdiction as it relates to Texas, what gets worked on a federal level does still have an impact of what happens in Texas, and we can still learn from what we're doing on the federal level. So those are some of the issues right now.
Yeah. So we're in the heart of hurricane season. Like, this is when we see the most storms around here. Sunday, we had literally NPR was interrupted with the National Weather Service out of League City. Within 2 minutes, sheets of rain. Flooding happened instantly. And we have a lot of new transplants to the city.
And they don't know.
And to the region. They're not familiar, right? But how do we address heavily local influence? How do you, as the congresswoman, right, as the next congresswoman, should you be elected, how will you influence policies here in the city to address the issues that constituents are facing?
Yes. Look, I think we always have to be prepared. If we've learned anything from Harvey and from Ike, even Beryl, we are just not prepared to address a lot of the weather concerns, whether it's fallen trees or excessive flooding or our seniors not having air conditioning. We have to make sure that we are thinking as thoroughly as possible about everything that could potentially happen. And we can't predict everything, but we can do a better job of making sure that we are prepared and that we are addressing concerns for the most vulnerable communities. My dad was one of those people that was stranded during Harvey. He had to be rescued by a helicopter. And all I think about is, why wasn't he evacuated to safety? And I was not in the city. So I'm doing all of this via phone and text and smoke signals, trying to figure out what's happening. But there was just no plan in place. And I do think Congressman Mayor Turner, he handled it very well. But we have to look multiple administrations ahead of time, because the storm may not take place while I'm in office, but while I'm in office, I'm able to implement strategies and procedures for if a storm does come when someone first gets into office. Because I think Mayor Turner had just come into office when Harvey happened. And that is what I want to do. it's not just about addressing something when it happens, but making sure that I'm preparing my office for if a storm happens, or if I leave office, that the next person is not just inheriting a mess and that they know what to do. And so I think there's always lessons to be learned. There's always things that we can improve on. I think we also have to just always keep in mind those most vulnerable communities. I tell people, folks in certain parts of the city, if they have the means, they're going to leave. So probably we don't need to address those certain parts of the city immediately if we know that there are more vulnerable communities that will not be able to evacuate. And so we just have to kind of think with the most vulnerable people in mind. And I think when we do that, we are able to help more people versus just not always thinking as strategically as we can about who will need the help if something catastrophic happens.
Okay, so now I'm going to go controversial.
Okay.
Right? This has been good. So if you're watching, and I know several of you are, go ahead and do me a favor. Drop your comments or questions in the chat box. We just lost our light. Drop those comments or questions in the chat box. You can just hit the...
And while we're waiting, I'm supposed to be sharing this on my Facebook, right?
Yes, you can share this on your Facebook.
How do I find
There's a button on there, Pretty Petty Politics. There we go. Thank you. So while she's pulling that up, y'all go ahead and drop your questions in the comment section. And we'll address those. We'll pull those up on the screen, in fact, if you have a question. So we have a question from Justin Boyd. Hi, Justin. And his question, let's put it on the screen. How will you engage and prioritize voters in rapidly changing areas like Spring, Tomball, and Cypress, which are turning purple, and ensure our concerns aren't overshadowed by the more traditionally blue parts of CD 18? Mm-hmm. I love that question. Thank you, Justin, for that.
Yes, that is really good. So, hey, Justin, I actually grew up in the suburbs. I spent a lot of time in 3rd Ward and 5th Ward because that's where my family lived. But personally, I grew up in the suburbs. And so I completely understand that question. And the concerns of people in the suburbs is very different than concerns of folks in the inner city. Also, what we are exposed to in the suburbs is very different. And so what we're thinking about when we're thinking of what we want our local leaders to be focusing on is very different. There are just certain things that we just don't deal with. We don't deal with, oftentimes you don't deal with violence on the same level, violence and crime. You don't usually deal with the environmental justice concerns as much. Even something like homelessness is not something we really experience in the suburbs. And so I do think that, again, a lot of times there is just a lack of communication. You have to be very intentional, especially in a district like CD 18, which includes the inner city and the suburbs, about making sure you're going out to every part of the district to understand their concerns. But I also would like to have some conversations that are centrally located, where we can bring the suburbs and the inner city together, because I don't think that happens often. And we can kind of have a cross conversation, a roundtable of sorts, where we do get to learn more about what's happening in the suburbs versus the inner city. Are there some best practices in the suburbs versus what's happening in the inner city? And then have a better understanding of where folks in the suburbs may feel forgotten, because I know that can oftentimes be an experience, especially when you're dealing with places that are more so surrounded by Republican leadership or Republican areas, making sure that they understand that they are not forgotten and we are including them in their concerns as well. And then having some best practices from what's happening in the suburbs that we can bring back to the inner city, because I think there's a lot of conversations around how we're protecting our communities, how we're keeping our communities clean, that we can address, and that we can also use as a good example for how we're addressing some of these issues in the inner city.
Okay. I enjoy that response. I know I'm pro Houston. I'm such a Houston girl. Yeah. Even though I'm not born and raised here, I'm anti-suburb. Yeah. And that's just me being kind of silly. But I really am concerned about, and I'm gonna go back to my controversial question next, but I am concerned about how the maps have been redrawn, right? So the most northern part of 18, which will remain until next December 2026, but then they will become a part of other districts, either 29 or 38. How do you speak to those constituents right now and ensure their confidence in their next representative for these next, 4 13, 14 months after the election?
Yes. First and foremost, I will say I know both of the representatives that have inherited parts of 18. I've worked closely with both of them. And that's not to say we always agree on politics, but I think they are all very intentional about representing their districts. I do think they understand the gravity of what's happening. They have also lost their constituents in certain parts of their current district. So I think everyone has been impacted, even Republicans. They may not be as vocal, but they have been impacted too. Everyone's been impacted by this change. But I do think for 18, it is particularly different because you have a portion of 18 that has historically always been Democratic that's going into a very red district. And then you also have a portion of 18 that is historically African American that will now go into a more Latino heavy district. And that is a change. I think whoever wins this seat, they have to understand that they're going to have to do some education with the other two representatives so they understand what they are inheriting. The same way if you were, giving someone something that you value, you're not just going to hand it over. You're going to make sure they understand how they handle it with care. So I think there needs to be a transition that takes place amongst the members to ensure that the people feel taken care of and feel heard and represented and throughout this change. And for the people, I just have to tell them, do not give up here. Like I fortunately am not being moved. My home will stay in the 18, but I can only imagine what it feels like to grow up your entire life being a part of the 18th congressional district with this long history of leaders and suddenly being moved out. It can feel very devastating. It can feel disruptive, and it can almost feel hopeless at this point.
It is disruptive,
yeah,
for sure.
And so, but I urge them not to give up, because what they want is for us to give up. They want us to feel disenfranchised and discombobulated and fractured in this moment. And this is the time where we really have to come together as a community, as Democrats, as people, as Houstonians, and make sure that we are sticking with one another. And so there does have to be a bit of, I guess, embracing of these new districts, because unfortunately we cannot change it. And so I want people to stay engaged. And
we can't change it, or we can't change it right
Well,
away.
We can't change it right now. So
Okay.
in terms of what will happen next year, we can't change it right now.
Right.
And there will be a change because we have another redistricting coming up, which is even more frustrating, right? We're doing all this change and it's going to change again. So that's very annoying. But the North Side, Acres Home especially, has historically been a stronghold, especially for African Americans in this city. And so we have to maintain that power. And so I hope that everyone out there, if Miss Edna Griggs is watching, I know she's a big leader in that area. I will continue to work with them. We will not forget about them. I say, being a member of Congress, you represent your district first and foremost, but you're representing all of Houston. And so one thing I learned from Congresswoman Jackson Lee, she didn't just confine her service to only the 18. She served everybody all across the city. And that's why people loved her everywhere. And that is the type of member I would be. You can still come to this office. I am still going to show up in certain places. I would not just say, oh, you're not in my district anymore, I'm not working with you. I will work with the Republican member as I have before in the past. I will make sure that he understands what are the now challenges that he's going to have representing this different demographic of people, and just make sure that they understand that they're not being left alone.
Okay. So having said that, this is a great pivot. We have CD 38. What's his last name?
Hunt.
Wesley Hunt. Hunt is working with Elon Musk, proposing to bring, I think, 12-foot wide pipes through our underground, our infrastructure, supposedly to help address some of infrastructure issues. Some experts are saying that the equipment, the proposal is not sufficient. What is your position on this collaborative effort that is building momentum? It's been in the media a bit these last couple of weeks. What is your position on what's being proposed between Wesley Hunt and Elon Musk?
Yes. I think oftentimes because of who proposes something, we automatically say it's a bad thing. If a Democratic member of Houston proposed this project, we would probably be applauding it and no one would actually look. I think we should always look at any project that's proposed by any member of Congress
Mm-hmm.
and any type of collaboration with the federal government. We should be looking at it in a way where we are fully understanding what are the impacts of this project and will it actually help before we invest millions of dollars. Now, I am not an engineer, so I cannot fully assess it, and I have not had enough of a deep dive into it to know every single thing, but I think all of us need to be asking questions. I do know that Congressman Hunt sits on the Natural Resources Committee, and so while he is a Republican, he does sit on a committee that does address environmental concerns. And so, I think we first give them the benefit of the doubt to just see. Now, if they are not able to provide the scientific evidence, and I think it needs to be evidence that is multifaceted. It cannot just be evidence coming out of the Trump administration. We need to hire outside people to make sure they're doing a full assessment of what it is that they're proposing. And those people need to be neutral and they need to be experts in their field. And then have the experts tell us, government officials, members of Congress, we propose wonderful ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're supposed to do a study because just because I think something's wonderful, an expert might say this doesn't make any sense. And so that's the purpose of doing a study. And you do a study and you let the experts and the people that we have entrusted across this country at the universities and at the think tanks to tell us, does this make sense? Then you have to have public buy-in. There needs to be a full comment period where the public is able to provide their opinions. If people feel like this is the dumbest project in the world, they should be able to express that. If they think this is the best idea since sliced bread, they should express that. There should be a fair process where we review those comments and then we make a decision. Now, under this current administration, it's hard to say that that is what will actually happen. Mm-hmm. That is what legally should happen, but it's hard to say that that will actually happen. I hope it will happen. And, maybe this is a moment where they prove us wrong, but I think we do need to address some of these infrastructure concerns. We need to address the flooding. This is who we have in office currently. This is who is leading this country. And I am here for any type of proposal that ultimately helps people. But I do think we have to be very thorough in discerning whether or not it is actually a solution versus something that will cause more problems.
Okay. Well, I know the local leadership, the Whitmire administration, is looking at this as something for the city to adopt. If you were a member of Congress and the city was leaning towards this, those are the things that you would want to see happen.
Yeah.
So constituents, residents of Houston, make sure you're talking to your city council members and asking them, are there going to be studies? Will there be public input, comments? Will public comments be taken on these issues? Because this is going to affect all of us.
Yeah, transparency with anything is the key. And I say this as someone that works for an industry that is oftentimes painted in a negative light. And I always tell anyone that I'm advising, when you're transparent and open with the public and they feel like they have been a part of the process, that is how you gain public trust. When you do things behind the scenes, when you tell the public what you're going to do instead of ask for their input, that is when they lose their trust. And so maintaining the public trust at all times, regardless of how simple or complicated the project is so important.
Yeah. Okay. So before we get ready to wrap up, I do have one more question. Major question, and this is the primary. We have primary in March, first Tuesday following the first Monday, but we have primary in March, and I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on Congressman Al Green? He has made it clear he's not jumping in this race, but he has not ruled out the primary in March. What is your position? Yes, I went there.
You went there. Hey, I never shy away from a difficult question. Look, I am as ambitious of a millennial as they come. There is not a single thing on this earth I don't think that with God and hard work that I cannot do. I have a huge level of respect and deference for Congressman Al Green. I have had a firsthand seat to the work and the sacrifice that it takes to be a member of Congress. I've worked for multiple members. I have worked for some of our most senior members of Congress, such as Congressman John Conyers. I walked the halls with Congressman John Lewis, and I work with younger members, such as Congressman Shamari Figurs out of Alabama. Mm-hmm. I understand the sacrifice. It is not easy to get on a plane and leave your friends and your family and your community, sometimes multiple weeks in a month, and fight in this very polarizing environment against people that literally want to tear apart every single civil right and freedom that we have worked so hard, and those who came before us worked so hard. And to see people just dehumanize people just because they don't agree or like them. And so Congressman Green has been targeted by President Trump and his administration. And it was very intentional because he was courageous enough to stand up against him in front of the entire country. And as a result of that targeting, we are now redistricting not only the state, but now the entire country. And as a result of that, Congressman Green's district is now a part of the 18th. And because of that, because he is not ready to leave his post, he has decided he is going to run. I think given everything that he has contributed to this country and this city and to leaders such as myself, he deserves to go out the way he wants to go out, with honor, with dignity, and with respect. And so I will not challenge him. If I win in November, I will not challenge him. I think that that is what he is owed. I think I am 36 and I have the rest of my life to serve in Congress, and I look forward to serving in Congress, but I don't want to serve to the extent that I am taking that away from him. And so I will stand with Congressman Green. If it requires an endorsement, I'm happy to endorse him, but I want to make sure that we are just not discarding our seniors, and we're not discarding our elders, and we're not discarding the people that have sacrificed their entire life, because Congressman Green has served for decades at this point. And I'm sure there are things that he wanted to do that he did not get to do because he was fighting for us and making it possible for someone like me to even have the opportunity to run for Congress. And so because of that, I personally will be standing down. And I just think before we point and say someone is too old or someone needs to give up the mantle, we need to sit and ask ourselves, what have we done to even deserve this seat? Because we're all running, we're all young, and we're ambitious. But truly, do we understand the gravity of what we are taking on? And do we understand what it really takes to do that job half as well? And do we understand the time that we're in and the shoes that we have to fill? And so for that reason, if he decides to stay in this primary, I think we should support him. And I think that is the case for any incumbent in this season that wants to stay in office, because this attack is not just an attack on Al Green, it is an attack on Democratic incumbents across the country. And if we focus on who is too old and too young to serve, what we're going to lose sight of is the fact that we must flip the House in 2026. And what they want is this chaos and confusion that they have created. So I personally will not be contributing anymore to the chaos and confusion. I am focused on making sure that we are, one, protecting the people of this district and the future district, and then two, making sure that we are doing everything in our power to flip the House in 2026.
Okay. So thank you for that very honest and very transparent response. We have Justin again. Pass the torch should be a choice. We need new leaders to step forward. Thank you, Justin, for that comment. So we are at the end. I do want to ask, just so people can get to know you better, I believe this is correct. You're a first generation.
On my dad's side.
On your dad's side.
And fifth generation on my mother's side.
U.S. citizen.
Texas.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. We, unfortunately, on the African-American side, we have no clue at what point our ancestors came. So I don't know what the generation is there for the country, but from a Texas standpoint, I'm a fifth generation Texan.
Okay, so let's talk about, I feel like unless I'm getting mixed up in my notes, and I kind of have photographic memory of my notes, you're from a family of immigrants?
Yes, my dad came here around my age, actually. He came from a small country in the Caribbean called Grenada.
Okay, so how has that contributed to your development? We are a city filled with immigrant communities, particularly in the 18th. Many people think immigrants in Houston, they think Southwest.
Yeah.
Right. But there's a rich immigrant community here in the 18th Congressional District. You have a large Honduran community. Yep. You have people from Grenada. You have people from throughout the Caribbean who have settled here, who aren't from, let's say, Jamaica, right? More popular islands. Tell us about what that's like.
Yes. So being the daughter of a Black immigrant, oftentimes, especially in the South, for some reason, everyone just thinks Black people are a monolith and that we don't have variances. There are more people that have immigrants in their family or immigrants as a part of their story than I think we give it credit. And so I've always grown up with a sense of both. I very much so grew up understanding my slave ancestry and my civil rights ancestry. My mother was the first African-American valedictorian of her high school, and later the first Black and female owner of a doctor's office in her entire county. My grandfather likewise was the first Black principal of the high school in the city he served in. And so I've always grown up with a very clear understanding of my history as an African American in this country. But on the flip side, I've also grown up understanding my father's side. My father was born into colonization. Grenada was a country that went through a war on behalf of the United States, and we were invaded by the United States. And there's a very long and somewhat dark history there as it relates to our relation with the U.S. And so I'm very cognizant of that. I'm cognizant of the fact that my dad grew up speaking French, and then they were colonized by the British, and then he had to learn how to speak English, and then come to America and was told that he didn't know how to speak anything, and what that struggle looked like, because he didn't go to college, but my mother became one of the few and first African-American graduates of MIT. So I've had both. And I think in this time, we are being told, especially as Black people, I get a lot of pushback because I talk about my immigrant experience. Mm-hmm. And it's really sad because Black immigrants have contributed so much to this country. The first female woman of Congress, Shirley Chisholm, was from the Caribbean. And so often, people like Malcolm X, he was of Grenadian heritage. Mm-hmm. And so we have a lot of African-American Caribbeans and African people that have either immigrated here or their family came here that have largely contributed to Black history, to African-American history, and have been partners with us in the struggles. And I completely understand that there sometimes exists in the divide. There are different feelings about the different communities. I think that is just another way to further divide us as a Black people. And we have to, especially in this time, be very protective of our immigrant brothers and sisters who have simply come here for a better life. Mm-hmm. And sometimes be even understanding of what they have overcome from a colonized people and how they were able to overcome that and find that unity, which I think in America, we're still struggling, because the way I can say, I know exactly where my great-great-great-grandparents were on my Grenadian side, I can't say that on my African-American side. And that is part of what fragments our healing process, because we don't know, because we were stolen and brought here. And so I'm very proud of that. I tell people as we have this conversation around what's happening with ICE, I definitely support deporting anyone that is a criminal in this country or doing any type of wrongdoing. I do not think they deserve to stay. But there also has to be an acknowledgement that Trump is not only attacking Latinos, he is attacking anyone that is an immigrant, and a lot of those people are Black people. Mm-hmm. And so we have to understand, as a Black people, we are attacked in so many different ways. Mm-hmm. And we just have to be united and supportive of Black people, regardless of what your story is.
Love it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is Zoe Cadore. Thank you so much for joining us here with Pretty Petty Politics here in the 18th for now. We are carved out.
Oh no, where are you going?
To 7.
Well, Congresswoman Lacey Fletcher is amazing. Yeah. So you are going into good hands. You're going into good hands. But it is sad.
This community is one of the original Black communities. Yeah. Like, this is old Houston. This is OG. Freedman. Like before Freedmanstown, Houston. Like this this is where the Allen brothers settled.
Got it. Okay, yeah.
So, we have some of the oldest churches in the city right here. Yep. So Antioch's down the street. Yep. We have Damascus. Mm-hmm. We have Brown Temple. You have Olivewood Cemetery. Yeah. And many other churches along Center Street throughout this community. So happy to have you here.
Thank you. It's an honor.
And best of luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
And any last words for the viewers?
Yes. Look, I thank you for everyone that has joined. I think we are in very trying times, mind-blowing times, honestly, and oftentimes it feels hopeless. But I am a very God-fearing spiritual person, and we, especially as Black people, we have gone through so much in this country. We have overcome it, and that is because at all times, regardless of how dark times might feel, we can always hold on to ourselves and our strength and what our ancestors have laid for us. And so that is what I hold on to every day. And so I just want to encourage people to keep going, keep fighting. This is just a battle, it is not the war. And we will overcome, we will win, but it does require us to keep persevering. And so I am pushing forward, I am continuing to fight. I hope that you continue to fight with me as well. Zoe Cadore, thank you so much for joining.
And that is our time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. And I will see you next week when we are joined by Amanda Edwards on the 9th. at 8:30 p.m. Have a good evening. Bye.